Hi, Angelo here, and it's the second Sunday of Advent. So, Advent, as we know, is about new beginnings. And for today's gospel, we start at the beginning of Mark. And even though, as much as this is a book about Jesus, I find it interesting that the first focus of the book, after they would have mentioned his name, is taking a look at the past, taking a look at the book of Isaiah. And it reminds me a little bit about the current process that the Catholic Church is undergoing, this synod process we're going through the last couple of years. Well, we're in the middle of it right now. And the reason this passage reminds me of the synod is because we currently are trying to rediscover these old ancient synodal practices. And in the same way, we have Mark taking a look at ancient Isaiah before he looks to start talking about Jesus. And even before he looked to really get into Jesus, his intro is taking us to John. This passage of Isaiah leads us to John out in the wilderness, John the Baptist. So we find John out in the wilderness, and he's described as wearing, I don't know, let's say a prophet's uniform, right? But he's identified as a person of importance. And he's not only important for us now, but he was also important to people 2,000 years ago because they left the comfort of their lives to go out and find this John. They left the comfort of their cities, the comfort of their homes, the comfort of their routines out in a place that they have, chances are, absolutely no idea, but they are in search of this one who they find preaching about conversion. And where's a good place to experience conversion? The wilderness. It's in that we get to recognize the sound of God's voice. We are silent enough to be able to hear God's voice and be able to answer the call. So the wilderness doesn't necessarily have to be a physical desert or whatever the case might be, but it could also be represented by the problems in our lives, the struggles with injustices we have in society. We are surrounded by wilderness as much as we like to believe that we are so developed. Ultimately, the wilderness is a place where we have no choice but to go through, and yet we cannot go through without this radical dependence on God. As long as we try to depend on ourselves, we will remain stuck in that wilderness. When we surrender all of it and we depend on God, we are able to make our way through and clear the path that Isaiah himself is referring to. So even in ministry, ministry is cool. But I know so many people, and I'll be the first one to say it, we describe ministry oftentimes as wilderness. And yet it was out in that wilderness where we experience the conversion. And John himself in his own ministry, as much as crowds of people left their lives to come and meet him, he himself said, I am the one. There's somebody who's coming after me. And he come with the Holy Spirit. So John, in his own humility, was able to recognize that, sure, I'm important, but my importance is nowhere near the true importance of the one who I am clearing this path for. We ourselves, as ministers, out in the wilderness, together as a community, we ourselves have to, at some point, recognize I am the one. We are the one. Rather, we are the messengers out in the wilderness, clearing the path for the true one to come. So, as leaders, we have the same call that all the prophets had. By virtue of our baptism, we ourselves have the call to clear the path out in the wilderness for Christ to come through. Another way I like to think about it is we have the call to clear the path for Christ and others to come true. And here I'm thinking about my young people in particular. Because were they not made in the same image and likeness of this Christ that we worship? So we prepare a way for the Lord, in this case might be our young people, and we make the path straight so that the Christ in them can come true. And one of the major ways that we get to do that is through conversion. I mean, we hear constantly about conversion. It's mentioned in today's story. It's mentioned all throughout the Gospels. It's mentioned all throughout the tradition. I mean, as Catholics, we say metanoia. Over in the East, they say metania. This idea of conversion, or this turning of our very selves to God, this is what we're required to do. And naturally, it leads to us clearing a path for our youth. We set our good examples. We act in a way that is nothing less than Christ like. And when we do that, not only do we make life easier for young people in terms of their own conversion, because we would have set all the groundwork, but we also make their lives better for them. Now is the time to set up better lives for our youth. And even though Jesus' mommy would have birthed him 2,000 years ago, we ourselves, especially during this season of Advent, birth Christ into the world too. And whether we do that through the physical, the emotional, the mental, etc., all of us are called to make this path straight so that Christ may come true in our lives. So, as we once again experience this time of Advent, let's refocus on our conversion to God. In the same way that we rediscover in these synodal practices and uncovering these great traditions that we have in our church, let us also look inside, turn inward, and start to rediscover the greatness in our own selves. Because when we do, we will then be able to clear the path to birth the greatness of God in our own lives and into our world. Thank you.